My family laughed when I showed up at my father's funeral. That is, until the lawyer read the will, and suddenly, not a single one of them could laugh anymore. The envelope didn't list a return address. Just my name written in that stiff, unmistakable handwriting I hadn't seen in years. I almost tossed it out with the rest of the junk mail. But something stopped me, some strange instinct that made my hands shake as I opened it. I didn't know what I expected, but I braced myself anyway. Inside was a funeral invitation. My father was gone. I stared at the paper, waiting for something to hit me: grief, shock, anger. But I felt nothing. Just a quiet stillness that settled over me like FOGIT had been 10 whole years since I'd had any contact with the Montgomerys. A decade since I walked away from Charleston, and from every cold glance, every dismissive comment, every icy silence they used like weapons. They'd made their stance clear. I was no longer one of them. I remember that day like it just happened. Caleb was still a baby, tucked into his car seat in the back as I drove away with a busted lip and a suitcase stuffed with onesies and baby bottles. I had finally left the man who'd broken more than my bones, and when I turned to my father for help, for safety, he gave me shame instead. "You made your bed," he said. And that was that. But I didn't fall apart. I built something. A life. Small, simple, but solid. In Savannah, I found quiet. I got a job stacking books at the local library. Every night, I read Caleb bedtime stories and slowly remembered how to breathe again, and why father never reached out. Not once. No apologies, no explanations. Still, I made sure he had what he needed. I sent money each month through old Mr. Graham, the neighbor who still waved at me like I hadn't vanished. I never told anyone, not even Caleb. Now I stood there, letter in hand, and the only thing circling in my head was, why now? Why ask back the daughter you so easily discarded? Caleb must have seen the shift in my face because he came up beside me and asked softly, "Are you going to go?" I couldn't answer, my throat was too tight. I just kept staring at the words printed on that crisp, white paper. Then he added, "Maybe he didn't just leave a will, Mom. Maybe he left something for you." I looked at my son, my anchor, my quiet witness, and something in me moved. I didn't know what waited for me back there, but one thing was clear. If there were any truths left unsaid, I needed to hear them. I folded the letter, packed a bag, and got ready to return to the place I'd sworn I'd never set foot in again. The chapel looked smaller than I remembered. Wooden beams stretched overhead, and muted stained glass filtered in the gray Charleston light. It should have felt peaceful, but the air was thick, cloying with too much perfume and old bitterness. I stepped through the double doors with Caleb's hand wrapped tight in mine. The moment we crossed the threshold, heads turned. Conversations died. Whispers flickered through the room like sparks looking for dry grass. Some folks didn't even try to hide their shock. Others just stared like they were seeing a ghost. And then I spotted them. Lindsay and David stood near the front, draped in black that fit just a little too perfectly. Grief sat on them like foundation, carefully applied, just visible enough to look respectable, but not deep enough to smear. Lindsay's eyes met mine first. For a moment, I saw disbelief. Then her mouth curled into a sharp little smirk. Well, she said, her voice low but loud enough for the surrounding pews to hear. Look who came crawling back. Guess the runaway thinks there's something left in the estate. David gave a soft chuckle, but his eyes were cold. Same judgment I grew up with. Nothing had changed. I didn't take the bait. I kept my gaze forward, shoulders straight, even though my heart screamed to turn and run. We found a seat at the very back, last pew, far from everyone. I didn't come for them. I didn't come for drama. I came to close a chapter. Caleb slid in beside me, holding my hand tighter than before. I could feel his small fingers shaking. I leaned down and whispered, "It's all right, baby. We're just here to sit." But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. They didn't call my name once. Up at the front, the preacher cleared his throat, and the service quietly got underway. There were some prayers, a couple of shaky eulogies, exactly the kind of overly polite, rehearsed mourning that feels more like a performance than grief. Not a single person mentioned me. No one even hinted that I was his daughter. They skipped over my existence like I'd never been part of the story at all, glossed straight from childhood memories to how tirelessly Lindsay had taken care of him in his final days, and how David flew in from his business trips to help out. The narrative was neat, carefully crafted, polished to leave me out completely. My father had died the same way he lived, telling a story that didn't include me. Beside me, Caleb rested his head on my shoulder, perfectly still. I kept my gaze forward, but every sideways glance, every muffled whisper behind a tissue, burned in my ears like static. I wasn't crying. Not because I didn't want to, but because my tears had already been spent, years ago. Once the service wrapped up, folks started filing out. Some walked right past me like I was invisible. One older cousin gave a stiff nod and quickly looked away. Lindsay breezed past me like I was just another piece of furniture. David was right behind her. He paused just long enough to throw a comment my way. "Didn't expect you to actually show." I met his stare without blinking. Neither did I. He gave a smug little smile. "Don't get too cozy. This story's not yours anymore." And just like that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. I stayed frozen on that pew, Caleb still leaning on me, my hand wrapped around his like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. They didn't get it. I wasn't there to be in the story. I was there to end it. The Montgomery family house hadn't changed much. Still the same big white columns, red brick facade, and ivy snaking up the porch rails like it was strangling something hidden beneath. But stepping inside after 10 years felt like walking into a walk-in freezer, too clean, too quiet, and cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. People were already gathering, distant cousins, a few old neighbors, some of my father's business partners. I recognized most of the faces, though not a single one looked at me directly. Conversations dropped to a hush when I walked in, but I could feel every sidelong stare like pins against my skin. Lindsay was camped out near the fireplace, slowly twirling a glass of white wine like she was hosting a bridal shower instead of mourning her father. David stood beside her, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other holding a glass of red, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad for arrogant sons. When they spotted me walking in with Caleb, David's smirk curled. "Well, this should be quick," he announced to the room, loud and clear. "She got cut out years ago." A few people laughed under their breath. Some turned away like they'd suddenly remembered they needed to check on something urgent on the other side of the room. I didn't react. There was nothing worth reacting to. I left my coat on, even though the fire was going strong. Caleb stuck close, clutching my hand with quiet urgency. He didn't say anything, but I knew he was watching, reading the mood, the way only a child who's lived through chaos knows how to do. We found a spot near the back of the parlor, away from the fire and the wine. I looked around, taking in the familiar walls and the rows of neatly framed photos. Lindsay at her college graduation. David on a sailboat. Family trips to Hilton Head. Not a single picture of me, not even one from when we were kids. I wasn't surprised. I hadn't just been forgotten. I'd been erased. Lindsay caught my eye and gave me a smile, not a warm one. "The kind that says you're trespassing. You can sit down if you want, Rachel," she said sweetly. "But don't expect a role in the next chapter." I didn't give her anything. Not a nod, not a blink. Just silence. Caleb looked up at me then, and I saw something in his expression, not fear, not confusion, but focus. Like he was waiting. Like he sensed that something important hadn't happened yet. And somehow I knew he was right. The room fell into an uneasy quiet when the front door creaked open again. Thomas Danner walked in like a man who knew exactly what kind of storm he'd just stepped into. Same tailored gray suit, same sharp expression, like time hadn't even touched him. Thomas Danner walked in with his usual polished leather briefcase, but this time he was carrying something else as well. Tucked under one arm was a small cedar box, smooth and gleaming like someone had just buffed it that morning. Lindsay barely looked up from swirling her wine. David checked his watch with an exaggerated sigh, like he had somewhere more important to be. "Thanks for coming," Mr. Danner said, his voice calm but firm, the kind of voice that didn't invite interruptions. Per Mr. Montgomery's final instructions, we'll begin with a video message. After that, we'll move on to the official reading of the will. The mood in the room changed, tightened. You could feel it? A video? Lindsay scoffed, already sounding irritated. Can't we just skip the dramatics and get to the will? We all know what it says. David nodded in agreement. Let's not drag this out. Some of us have flights. But Mr. Danner didn't budge. He passed them without so much as a glance and set the cedar box gently on the coffee table by the fireplace. Then he placed his briefcase beside it and started unfastening the latches. It was your father's specific request, he said, that this message be played before any legal business is discussed. Lindsay rolled her eyes in full performance. David muttered something too low to catch. A few cousins leaned in, curiosity starting to win over their disinterest. I stayed quiet. But Caleb sat up a little straighter next to me. His hand loosened slightly in mine. I looked down at him, and his face, it was soft, open, lit with a flicker of something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hoped he didn't say anything, but it was like I could feel it radiating off of him. Like somehow he already knew this moment was coming. Like he'd been waiting for it even longer than I had. For the first time since I stepped foot in that house, I didn't feel completely alone. The screen flickered once. Then again. A faint hum filled the room as the image settled into focus, and there he was, my father. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner, too. His proud, squared shoulders had rounded with age, his once piercing eyes duller now, heavier with something I couldn't quite name. He sat at his old oak desk, the one we were never allowed to touch as kids. Behind him, the marsh painting still hung on the wall, just like it had my whole childhood. He looked straight into the camera. If Rachel's watching this, he said, voice lower than I remembered, gravelly like it had been worn down by years of silence. Then, I guess I finally have to say what I never could. The air in the room froze. I owe you an apology. Every breath seemed to hold still. Even Lindsay lowered her glass slightly. I was wrong, he said. I judged you for leaving a marriage I didn't understand. I called you weak. Selfish. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, because admitting I was wrong would have meant asking questions I wasn't ready to hear. He paused, hands twitching just a little in his lap. I'd never seen that before, a nervous habit maybe, or just the weight of regret finally breaking through. When you showed up on my doorstep that night, bruised, scared, your baby in your arms, I should have brought you inside. I should have told you you're safe now. But I didn't. I let my pride speak louder than my love. My throat tightened. Caleb reached for my hand again. I gripped his gently, never looking away from the screen. I told myself I was teaching you responsibility. But what I was really doing, my father continued, was punishing you for leaving, for choosing yourself, for being stronger than I ever taught you to be. Behind me, someone shifted in their seat. Someone else let out a breath a little too loud. But I didn't turn around. I couldn't, not now. He looked down for a moment, then back up, eyes shining. I found out the truth, Rachel. A few years ago, Gerald showed up with an envelope. Said it came from a friend to help with the heating bill. But I knew that handwriting. Didn't take me long to figure it out. He leaned in a bit, voice steadier now. You sent money. Every month. Quietly. No name. No notes. Just help. You never stopped caring, even when I gave you nothing back. Even when I pretended you didn't exist. You never stopped being my daughter, even when I stopped acting like your father. I blinked hard, my breath catching in my chest. I tried to stop the tears, but they came anyway. Hot. Fast. Silent. I watched you from a distance, my father continued. Gerald kept me updated. He told me about the library, about Caleb. Said he's a sharp one. Said he looks at the world like you do, carefully. With patience. Then he smiled. Just a small, tired smile, and it shattered me. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Rachel, he said. But if I can leave you with anything, let it be this. I was wrong. You were right. You did what I should have done a long time ago. You protected your child. You walked away from pain. And you built something better. He took a shaky breath. I don't want to be remembered as the man who turned his back on his daughter. So I changed the will. He paused. They don't know yet, but they will. Gasps cut through the room like startled birds. Someone muttered a curse under their breath. Lindsay jerked upright in her chair. David's jaw clenched so tight I thought I heard it pop, but none of that registered. All I heard was my father. For the first time in 10 years, I heard him. All I ever wanted was to be proud of my children, he said. And I am. I'm proud of you, Rachel. Of the woman you became, especially when I wasn't looking. The screen dimmed for a breath, then flickered back to life one last time. Tell Caleb thank you, he said, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. For giving me one last chance to be a father, even from a distance. Then everything went black and no one moved. The silence wasn't grief. It was something heavier, denser, like the room was holding its breath. The whispers started before the darkness even faded. Confused, angry, unbelieving. Mr. Danner didn't wait for the noise to die down. He adjusted his glasses, opened the leather folder on his lap, and said, the video was presented to provide context. Now, per Mr. Montgomery's revised, notarized, and legally binding last will and testament, I will read the final allocations. Lindsay exhaled hard through her nose, like she was bracing for battle. David crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, his smugness returning like the video had been just some emotional performance. To my daughter, Rachel Elaine Montgomery, Mr. Danner read, I leave the Charleston family home, its contents, and all surrounding property in full. The room turned. I felt the heat of every stare, necks snapping in unison, disbelief rippling like static. My hands stayed frozen in my lap. Caleb's fingers still tangled in mine. In addition, Mr. Danner continued, I leave to Rachel Montgomery the amount of $250,000 in liquid assets and the remaining balance of my retirement savings. The air shifted, thinner, unsteady, and to her son, Caleb Montgomery, I leave a college trust in the amount of $100,000. My heart tripped over itself. Caleb blinked up at me, his mouth parted slightly like he wasn't quite sure what he'd just heard. Honestly, neither was I. Mr. Danner flipped to the last page. To my son, David, and my daughter, Lindsay, I leave the following: a collection of family photo albums, my military compass, and the Bible gifted to me by my mother when I turned 18. A choked sound escaped someone across the room. Lindsay shot to her feet. What? Her voice was high, cracking. That's not possible. There has to be a mistake. There is no mistake, Danner replied without flinching. Your father updated the will 2 years ago. It was signed, witnessed, and registered with the county. David stood too, shoulders tight. He was sick. He didn't know what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing, Mr. Danner said. Then he closed the folder with a soft snap. A hush fell again. Then he unfolded a small handwritten note and read from it, his voice lowering slightly. Let them remember who showed up when it mattered. Let them remember who stayed quiet, but never stopped loving. This house should belong to the one person who never asked for anything, and gave anyway. Lindsay stormed out of the room. Her heels hit the floor like thunder. David followed after a beat, stiff, silent. Disbelief clung to David like a shadow. But I didn't move, not because I was in shock, but because for the first time in 10 years I didn't feel erased. I felt chosen. You had to have tricked him, Lindsay spat, turning to me, her wine glass still clutched, but forgotten. Her voice cracked, then rose again. There's no way he would have changed the will on his own. You must have. She trailed off, the accusation withered midair. She saw my face, and whatever she thought she was about to say died in her throat. I stood still, silent. I didn't need to defend myself. The truth had already been spoken for once, not by me. You manipulated him, she said again, louder this time. Her face was red now, rage rising like a fever. After everything you did to this family, you come back here playing some silent saint? This is pathetic. Caleb flinched beside me. I rested a hand on his shoulder, not to shield him, but to steady myself. To remind myself that I was still here. Still grounded. Still standing. David stepped forward now, his voice low and tight with fury. We'll contest this. There's no way it holds. He was sick. He was confused. Mr. Danner didn't even blink. Your father amended the will 2 years before any decline in health. He was of sound mind. The documents are witnessed, notarized, and filed with the county court. There is no basis for a challenge. David opened his mouth to speak again, but stopped. Maybe it was the way Mr. Danner looked at him. That calm, courtroom stare honed by decades of legal battles. The kind of look that made even the loudest men go quiet. Around us, the room had fallen into a strange stillness. The tension was gone. What remained was aftermath. Some cousins whispered behind cupped hands. Others slipped out through side doors, coats clutched, faces turned away. No one looked at me, not out of hate, out of guilt. Maybe shame. Lindsay's breathing had turned uneven. Her hands trembled as she set the wine glass down too hard on the sideboard. This is a joke, she muttered. A damn joke. She didn't wait for a reply. She just turned and walked out. David followed seconds later, his jaw locked tight like he was holding back every word he wanted to throw at me, and just like that the room emptied. They thought they'd buried me 10 years ago, but I was still here. And now they were the ones running. The quiet that settled wasn't awkward. It wasn't tense. It was peaceful. Honest. I stayed in my seat. Caleb beside me. His small hand still wrapped in mine. Warm. Solid. Real. We sat like that for a long time. And for the first time in forever. I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt home. His hand still rested in mine. The grip had loosened, but he hadn't let go. Neither had I. No one else was left in the room. The murmur of retreating voices had faded down the hall. Doors clicked shut. Footsteps disappeared. I rose slowly, legs a little stiff, and walked toward the far corner of the room, to the old leather reading chair tucked beneath the bay window. It was still there, unchanged, faded at the arms, creaking at the joints, worn into the exact shape of the man who once sat there like a king in his own little castle. I stared at it for a long second, then reached down and brushed my fingertips along the top edge. Goodbye, Dad, I whispered. I forgive you. The words didn't catch in my throat. They didn't burn or twist. They just landed like they'd been waiting to. Behind me, Caleb stayed quiet. He didn't need to speak. The fireplace crackled softly, casting a warm orange glow across the room. Over the photographs on the mantel, the worn floorboards, even the air itself, it all felt different now. Not hostile. Not heavy. Just calmed. I turned slowly, taking in the house one last time. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a place that had cast me out. It felt like a home that had finally exhaled. Maybe some ghosts don't leave. Maybe they just wait for the right words, and I had finally said mine. Weeks later, the house was quiet in a different way. Not the silence of absence, but of peace. Caleb had claimed the sunroom as his own. Every morning, I found him there, surrounded by colored pencils and birdsong, sketching cardinals, blue jays, wrens. Every bird he spotted in the backyard trees. Sometimes, his laughter would echo down the hallway, soft and bright, filling spaces that used to take point. One morning, a letter arrived, plain white envelope. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Gerald Adams. I opened it slowly. My hands were steadied as he cried. Rachel, the note read, the day he realized it was you. I'd never seen your father look so small. He carried that truth with him until the end. I folded the letter and stepped out onto the porch. Caleb sat on the top step, sketchpad in his lap, tongue between his teeth as he shaded in a hawk's wings. I looked out across the yard. The oak trees swaying in the breeze. The house felt alive again. He saw me in the end. I said aloud, not to anyone, really. The girl they erased hadn't disappeared. She was just waiting for the truth to find its way home.